Mark Pomeroy is taking today's awesome message. It's week 4 of Follow Me. Enjoy.
Well, hey there, Elevate family and friends. Great to have you with us today. Now, I don't know how many of you are old enough to remember watching television in the late 1900s. If you are, you would remember a thing called commercials. Now, of course, I'm not talking about YouTube commercials that you can typically skip after 6 seconds. No, I'm talking about the experience of watching television and being victimized by having to repeatedly watch blocks of 4 to 6 30-second commercials being shoved down your throat, and you didn't have a choice. You just had to ride it out. Of course, with the advent of streaming services, you typically aren't getting commercials because you're paying for the subscription. Now, I no longer watch Freeview TV. I'm more of the streaming guy. Though I do watch an unconscionably large amount of ESPN via a set-top box arrangement that we've got here. And let me tell you this, ESPN, which is pretty much almost exclusively focused on male-oriented professional sports, NBA, NFL, Major League Baseball, etc., etc., they have a lot of commercials. Most of them targeted at dudes. And one of the ones that's on high rotation at the moment here in Australia is for Ram Trucks. Now, Ram Trucks is a US-based company, hasn't really had a presence here in Australia. Pretty big deal in the pickup truck world in the US, but they're trying to make a big splash here in Australia. And they're running a commercial at the moment which opens up with these two guys unloading something off the back of a pickup. And one of the guys says to his mate, you didn't really need to get a Hemi V8, did you? And the mate says, get in. And so they jump in, and then there's this drone footage of watching this Ram truck out in the middle of nowhere, carving it up through the sand and crossing the water and going up a hill. And about sort of 15, 20 seconds of this rough and ready action, they go inside the cab, and the driver, who's the owner, who needed the Hemi V8 Ram truck, says to his mate, "Enough said?" And the mate's like, yeah, enough said. And that's it. What they're trying to do, and what the advertisers are trying to do, is they're trying to convince you that you have a Ram truck shaped hole in your heart, and that they can fill that Ram truck shaped hole for, as little as $110 $1,000. And the promise is that having filled that hole, you can now do all this stuff and you'll have a greater life. Because come on now, who doesn't want to have a greater life? I mean, marketers just assume that viewers are sitting there wanting to have a greater life, and they play to that. And look, you know, a lot of the decisions we make, we attempt to make them with the goal that they will take us to a greater life. But what we learn is that no amount of stuff, accomplishments, experiences will ultimately fill the hole in our heart, because the hole in our heart is not a Ram truck shaped hole, it's a God-shaped hole, and it's only God that can fill it. And so, yeah, we're very much about pointing people to a greater life, but it's not found from the stuff we are being sold from marketers. In fact, God Himself invites us to a greater life. This series is called Follow Me, where we're talking about and focusing on the reality that Jesus, when He walked the earth on multiple occasions, He offered a simple two-word invitation to numerous people. And the invitation was, follow me. And inherently gift-wrapped with that invitation is the promise of transformation. That over a period of time, if we choose to follow Jesus and continue to follow Him, that He will lead us to higher and better and greater. And so week one, actually all 3 weeks of the series up till now, we've focused on Jesus inviting individuals. Week one was a tax collector, a Jewish tax collector named Matthew. Week two was a rich young ruler whose name we don't know. Last week was one of Jesus' handpicked 12, where Jesus invited him to follow Him, and then He had to extend that invitation again. And look, this stuff is incredible. It's applicable today because Jesus offers us that same invitation today. Follow me. And so if you missed any of those 3 weeks of this series so far, I mean, of course, go back and watch them on this channel, or if you want a more portable version, take us with you on your favorite podcast app. Just search for Elevate Church Perth and you'll find all of these messages and plenty more as well. Today's invitation isn't to an individual. Today's invitation is one that Jesus extended to a crowd. So if you've got your smartphone camera, pop that open and scan this flow code, and it's going to take you to John's biography of Jesus' life. It's going to take you to the 8th chapter in the New Living Translation. And what it's going to take you to, and this is John at this point in history, is a setting. It's in the morning. Jesus had gone to the temple, and a crowd had gathered, and Jesus had started teaching them. I'm going to drop us into Jesus teaching them, but actually this is where Jesus resumed teaching them, because after Jesus commenced teaching them initially, there was a pretty profound interruption. Jesus dealt with that, and then He resumed teaching, and He taught this. But actually, important thing to note is what I'm about to read to you. Jesus taught this in response to what had happened in that interruption. And this is what Jesus taught. John writes that Jesus spoke to the people once more and said, I am the light of the world. If, underline that word, if you follow me, you won't have to walk in darkness, because you'll have the light that leads to life. This is an incredible promise, even better than a Ram truck, believe it or not. that you will have, if you follow Jesus, you won't walk in darkness. I mean, who wants to walk in darkness? Sometimes we find ourselves walking in darkness, but that's not where we intended to go. And hopefully, it's not where we intend to stay, and it's certainly not where Jesus wants us to be, wants us to remain, and he wants to lead us as the light of the world out of the darkness and into the light. Now, as I mentioned, Jesus dropped this promise and invitation in response to this interruption.
But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early in the morning he came again to the temple. All the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and placing her in the midst, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. So what do you say?" This they said to test him, that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. And as they continued to ask him, he stood up and said to them, "Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her." And once more he bent down and wrote on the ground. But when they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the older ones, and Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus stood up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, Lord." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on, sin no more."
Now, everything, literally everything about this is fishy to me. First of all, it's the morning. Don't the religious leaders have anything better to do than walk around peeking into people's bedroom windows in the morning? Secondly, where's the guy? I mean, last time I checked, it took two to tango, if you know what I'm talking about. And thirdly, why are they bringing her to Jesus? Jesus wasn't a legal authority representing anyone who could judge somebody guilty or not guilty of any particular crime or sin or whatever. Well, John answers that by highlighting the fact that this was intended to be a trap, that the religious leaders were trying to paint Jesus into a corner. And the reasons why is, first of all, if they quoted the law of Moses says this, and if Jesus had gone against the law of Moses, they could have branded Jesus as a heretic. What sort of a Jewish rabbi are you? You actually are saying that we shouldn't obey the law of Moses. Secondly, Jesus had become increasingly known for his teaching and actions around mercy and forgiveness. And therefore, if he was to say, yeah, we should stone this woman to death, then that's going to call into question all of this stuff he's been preaching, kind of contradictory to his message of mercy and forgiveness. And thirdly, because, these religious leaders were seeing Jesus' popularity as increasingly threatening to them and their power, they were aware that in that time in history, only the Roman government could sanction somebody to be killed by capital punishment. And if Jesus had tried to green light it, then the Romans would have got involved and it would have been game over for Jesus. But nobody paints Jesus into a corner. Ode to Dirty Dancing. And in the moment, Jesus pulls off a genius move. The genius of Jesus. He didn't even answer their question. He just bent down and he started writing in the ground. Now, come on, people. Where are the people standing by filming this with their smart cameras when you need them? Because I would have loved to have known what Jesus wrote in the sand. And there's a ton of theories, okay? My second favorite, I've got two favorites. My second favorite is that Jesus was potentially writing the list of names of all of the religious leaders who had gathered there. And then under each of their names, the list of the sins that they'd committed that he, as the Son of God, knew about. It's my second favorite theory. My absolute favorite theory is Jesus started writing down the names of the religious leaders who themselves, at some point in their life, had committed adultery. Hashtag awkward. However, the reality is we'll never know. And that's actually not the thing to focus on here. The thing to focus on is that Jesus' response in this interruption was actually sandwiched between two aspects of darkness. The first of which was the darkness of religious people judging other people. And we can kind of teach them, but let's be honest. It can be pretty easy to fall into the trap of judgment. I mean, think about this. Let's say for whatever reason you decide to clean up your nutrition approach and you jump on one of the streams of nutrition. You're going low carb, or you're going keto or vegan or extra cheese or all chocolate or whatever it is. You think, that's what's going to get me to my new health goals. And so you're into it and you're kind of 2-3 months in. You've leaned out some, you're feeling great, you're sleeping well, your mind's clearer than it's ever been. And you roll into some social gathering, or you pitch up with some friends at a restaurant and you look around and you think to yourself, I can't believe these people are eating that crap. And in that instance, lose sight of the very reality that was you 2 months ago. It's so easy, if we allow ourselves to go unchecked, to begin judging people. And yet, by comparison, because that's a dark place, that's this darkness of judgment, by comparison, following Jesus, who's declaring himself the light of the world, and that he'll lead us out of darkness into the light that leads to life. If you and I choose to follow him every single day, in every single way, then you will see yourself over time becoming less selfish. You'll find yourself forgiving some people you never thought you could forgive, and ultimately, therefore, letting go of some bitterness. You'll find yourself responding to God's generosity towards you by being generous towards others and growing in your generosity. And ultimately, you'll start to experience a greater life. Not a perfect life, but a greater life, because you're walking in the light that leads to life. That said, when this starts to become your reality, never lose sight of the fact that you used to walk in the darkness. Never lose sight of the fact that you're still a work in progress too, and that you still have, and I still have, some stuff going on in our lives that we would not actually want Jesus to write in the sand in front of our sphere. And as a bonus thought, not only is it not the greater life to be walking around judging people, the greater life would actually have us starting to ask God, how can you use me? Please use me to reach them and to build them. Let me double click on this as well. The only person without sin in this moment in history was Jesus. Therefore, according to Jesus, the bar that he put in place in that interruption is that the only person qualified to throw a stone at this woman was Jesus, and he didn't. And he demonstrates this very, very powerful reality that if you live with rocks of judgment in your hands, then you have no capacity to hold, let alone offer anything else. You cannot be generous because your hands are filled with rocks of judgments. You can't give words of life or encouragement because you're just ready to throw rocks and there's no room for anything else. Now, this doesn't mean that we green light and validate everything that the people in our sphere are doing. There is such a thing as sin. Jesus used that word when he spoke to the woman who'd been caught in the act of adultery. He labeled it as sin. We unpack sin as being something, us thinking, saying, or doing things that are less than God's best. But when people are sinning, when people are thinking, people in your sphere are thinking, saying, and doing things that are less than God's best, your rock throwing is not going to be their turning point. Ever met somebody who is so excited that they can't wait to tell you that they've been judged to better? I used to be caught up in this addiction, and thank God some religious people judged me, and it turned my life around. No. Doesn't work that way. So here's the pro tip. Leave the judging to God and instead focus on being grateful to God that he hasn't thrown rocks at you, and in fact that he's extended grace and mercy to you, and look for ways to extend grace and mercy to other people. Start to pray for them, for God to do incredible things in their life the way that you're praying for God to do incredible things in your life. Start to encourage them. I don't know anybody who's living in complete darkness. So look for bright spots and encourage them in that. Be generous towards people. Being generous towards people who don't deserve it is powerful. And ultimately, as Jesus followers, we're meant to not only walk in the light, we're meant to reflect the light, to actually be people that God can use to highlight that there's actually a better way to live, and that is to follow Jesus. So there was this first darkness, this darkness of religious people judging other people. Then Jesus has the interaction with the woman, and we start to see another aspect of darkness. And that's the trap of you judging yourself, living in the darkness of guilt and shame that you feel, or that you assume other people feel towards you because of some choices you've made. Let me just lighten the mood for a moment. I found a few posts this week where people posted about, well, things under the category that are broadly known as regret meals. Here's one. I bought a dozen Krispy Kreme donuts, parked where there was no one around, and ate in silence. Well, there was some soft moaning. Or this one. I told my wife I was going to the gym, but went to McDonald's instead. I waited until it seemed long enough for a workout, and when I got home, poured water in my head and shirt to make it look like I'd been sweating. Yeah, okay. Feeling a little bit of guilt and shame, a little bit of regret from those regret meals perhaps. But there was this woman who almost certainly was living in the darkness of guilt and shame, especially now that it had been put on public display in the temple by the religious leaders. And to her, Jesus stood up again and said, "Where are your accusers? Didn't even one of them condemn you?" See, not only is Jesus not one of your accusers, he wants to free you from your accusers. He wants to actually stand between them and you, whether those are religious people or yourself accusing you. Jesus wants to set you free from guilt and shame. But just like I said that not judging people isn't the same as green lighting and validating everything they do, the same for Jesus. He didn't, whilst he didn't condemn this woman, he didn't validate what she was doing. He called it sin. But he didn't call it sin to shame her. He called it sin speaking as the light of the world. He wanted to shine his light into the darkness of her sin, but not to judge her, not to cause her to feel shame, but to say, hey, I can help you with this. I can deal with this. I can actually lead you from this place to a greater place. All you need to do is follow me, to learn to walk in the light that leads to life. You know, he said, there's no people here condemning you, neither do I, but go and sin no more. Go and live at a higher altitude. Go and live a greater life. Go and walk in the light. And then says to the people, when he resumed teaching them, as the woman walked off, I'm the light of the world. If you follow me, you won't have to walk in darkness, because you will have the light that leads to life. What an incredible invitation, and what an incredible promise. And that invitation and that promise is for you today. So take it. Say yes to it. Say yes to it tomorrow, and the day after, and the week after, and the month after. And watch and allow Jesus to lead you to a greater life.